Welcome back, survivor. If you can hear this, it means you're still alive. This is Jack's Nightmares, and this is your next story. I didn't think I'd be alive long enough to make this decision, but I didn't make it because I wanted to. I made it because there was no other place left to go. By the time I left my apartment, I hadn't spoken to another person in over 3 weeks. The tap ran dry the day before. The last can of beans had rust around the rim, but I ate it anyway. I'd been careful. Careful was the only thing that kept people alive after the initial collapse. But careful doesn't make water appear. Careful doesn't stop mold from blooming on the last half loaf of bread, or keep batteries from draining. I had held out longer than most in that part of the city. The early evac order came just 2 days after the broadcast switched from flu warnings to federal deployment notices. Our sector was one of the first cordoned off. Police, firefighters, and anyone with a badge were pulled back to the southern transit hub, where the city tried to establish a containment perimeter and medical triage center. That lasted less than a month. I never saw the inside of that zone. I was one of the people left behind when they drew the line. At first, I thought my brother would make it. He worked patrol out of the 8th precinct, the one near my building. When the relocation began, he said he was being sent with his unit to help set up supply routes and would check in once he got there. That was the last message I received. His name was never on any of the casualty reports, but the reports stopped coming altogether around the 3rd week. The phone network went fully dark soon after. I didn't leave because I had a destination. I left because my ceiling started dripping. There hadn't been rain in days. The apartment above mine had burst its pipes. No one there to shut it off. I packed what was left in my backpack, wrapped my hand around the metal key I kept in a tin under the sink, and headed for the only place I could think of that might still have power, shelter, and some kind of order. The abandoned police station sat 3 miles northeast. It was just far enough from the initial riot zones and looting sprees to have been left relatively untouched. Most people had either tried to get into the evacuation buses or run from them. But I remembered the building well. I'd done contract work in the maintenance rooms, helped install vent dampers, and test the backup generators. More importantly, my brother had left me a copy of the shop key, just in case, taped behind the glove compartment of my old truck. I kept it after he transferred to the South District. I hadn't driven that truck since the roads clogged with abandoned vehicles, but the station wasn't out of reach on foot. I took back streets, moved in daylight, stayed away from anywhere that looked even slightly picked over. By the time I reached the north side precinct, my canteen was empty and my legs ached, but I hadn't seen another person in hours. The outer fence was intact but bent near the north corner. I slipped through without touching the metal. The front doors were locked, but the rear access to the maintenance corridor had an old mechanical lock and a keyed latch. I tried the key. It turned. I stepped into darkness. No alarms, no sounds, just the soft click of the door behind me easing shut. The hallway beyond was cold and stale. It smelled like rust, ink, and old sweat. A clipboard had fallen to the floor, its pages curled with moisture. No sign of people, no blood, no wreckage, no shattered glass. Just a dead station frozen mid-shift, the kind of silence that made your ears ring if you stayed still too long. The vending machines in the break room were still stocked. There was no power to them, but the food inside hadn't been touched. Even the coffee station had half a bag of grounds and a bottle of powdered creamer shoved behind the filters. The refrigerator was empty, but the drawers were full of utensils and spare office snacks, the kind cops forgot they left behind. Most of the gear lockers had been cleared out, but not all. The armory was locked up tight, but the riot shield rack was still bolted to the south hallway. The keys to some of the patrol cars were still clipped in numbered slots on the back wall. Radios, flashlights, triage packs. Some stations were stripped. This one had been left in a rush. It made sense. The city thought the evacuation would be temporary. A wave, not a flood. They'd be back in a few days to reoccupy the area and get traffic moving again. That was the tone of the last citywide broadcast I heard before the signals vanished. Optimistic, almost smug, but now, No one was coming back. The power was still flowing, at least from the grid. I found the electrical panel just off the loading dock. Main breakers were live, but a few circuits had been shut off by hand. I flipped one marked lobby lights, and the overheads buzzed to life. I shut them off again. No point drawing attention from outside. The generator was intact, a diesel-fed unit with 5 barrels stored on a metal rack nearby. I checked the valves and the battery start. It clicked once, hard and clean. I didn't run it yet. Fuel was life now. Better to ration. I found my way into the workshop and took inventory. Most of the tools were still where I remembered them. My red vise was bolted to the bench near the western wall. Same spot I'd left it last year when I replaced the drainage pump. There were rolls of industrial tape, boxes of gloves, wire spools, even a chain hoist. The room felt untouched. I set my pack down and sat on the low stool beside the back cabinet. Not because I was tired, but because my legs didn't want to stand anymore. I didn't know how long I'd stay. I didn't know if I'd stay at all. At first, I told myself I'd just gather a few supplies, batteries, maybe a pry bar, and head back to my apartment for one more night. But after checking the hallway locks and glancing once out the side window toward the street where 2 cars were angled nose to nose, with doors hanging open, I knew I wasn't going back. This building still had structure, still had integrity, more than I could say for anything left in my neighborhood. I didn't have much hope, but I had steel doors, concrete walls, and a key to the tool room. That was enough to start something. When I flicked the lobby light on one last time, I noticed the duty roster was still up behind the front desk. Names, shifts, a few notes scrawled in black marker. The last entry was from over 3 weeks ago. Just a partial line, reassigned to, then nothing. I pulled the plywood down from the supply room and took measurements of the front windows. Cut fresh panels, drilled fast, screwed them into place before the sun fully dipped. I wanted to finish while I could still see the sky. By the time dusk settled, I had barred 4 doors, sealed 3 hallways, and used the sledge to wedge a cabinet under the garage latch. I scavenged what food I could from lockers and vending drawers and set it out on a central table with my remaining rations. My phone still showed no signal. The battery blinked red. I tapped through the last few unsent texts, rereading my final message to my brother, wondering what road he ended up on and whether he ever made it to the evac zone before it fell off the map. I closed the screen and tucked the phone away. Somewhere outside, a siren cried, and then cut short. Farther off, a single gunshot echoed between empty towers. A generator hummed from a block away, then sputtered and fell silent. Inside the station, it was still. Nothing moved except the shadows of tree branches curling across the boarded lobby windows. The emergency lights buzzed in a slow pulse. I walked back to the workshop, dragged the evidence cart up from the basement storage, and began making a list of what could be used for defense. I didn't think I'd sleep. Not really. Not with the air feeling this heavy. Then the intercom chirped. It startled me so much my drill slid off the screw head and nicked the skin on my knuckle. I wiped it on my jeans and stepped to the wall panel. I did not press the talk button. I waited. A voice came through, thin and tinny, like someone speaking from the end of a long pipe. A woman said hello like she was calling a neighbor from the sidewalk. She said her name was Rina. She said she used to be an officer here. She said she was outside with a paramedic named Carla, and a man who used to be a sergeant. She said they had a family with them and one of the kids was shaking. She asked if the backlot gate was secure. I kept staring at the panel. She said she remembered me from the workshop on the 2nd floor, the one with the red vise and the old sticker that said, "Turn off the compressor." She spoke like someone choosing every word. She said they were at the loading bay and could I please come to the inner door. I walked the rear corridor and set my ear to the steel. I heard low voices on the far side. I heard the soft tap of a ring on the doorknob. I spoke through the door. She spoke back with details only someone who had walked these halls would know, like the dent in locker number 5 and the first aid kit kept behind the radio room map. I asked them to hold their IDs up to the camera. The feed was grainy, but I recognized her face. She had taken a sink apart with me once to find a lost wedding band. I keyed the inner lock. The group entered fast and then stopped in the vestibule when I raised my hand. I told them I had turned off the air handlers when I shut the place down. That way air was not drawing in from outside. We checked everyone for cuts. Carla had a jump bag and a measured way of moving that calmed everyone else. She inspected the boy first and said he was shaking because he was cold and scared and tired. The mother held him, rocking in a slow rhythm. I felt something behind my ribs loosen when the boy looked up at his mother and focused and asked if he could sit now. We brought them inside. I slid the heavy inner door and set the bar. The sergeant's name was Mike. He had left his uniform shirt behind, wore a dark jacket, and kept one hand cupped against his side as if he had been bruised. He spoke little. Rena did most of the talking. Carla walked the boy, Max, to the front bench and gave him a blanket and a bottle of water. The mother, Cara, and father, Daniel, nodded their thanks. I showed everyone the break room and the bathrooms and the gym where cots were stacked. I pointed out the red lines I had painted on the floor near every exterior door. "Stay behind those at night," I said. "If that door opens, no one crosses the line until we know why it opened. No one stands in front of a glass pane with the light on. No one props any door open for air. We will use the vents when I can control them." Rena looked at the lines, then at me, and said the rules were good. We ate what was left in the vending machines. I turned the coffee machine hot water on and filled a jug with it so Carla could sterilize what she needed to. We drew a quick map of the building and divided tasks. Rena took the north wing with Daniel and checked rooms for any unlocked windows. Mike walked the motor pool bays with me and pointed out the silent cars lined up against the wall. Many had keys in the lockboxes. The station had cleared out in a hurry. We found a dozen riot shields in a rolling rack and 4 bundles of the barrier poles used for crowd lines. In the training closet, we found unfilled sandbags left over from a flood prep drill 2 years ago. In the maintenance yard behind the motor pool, there was a bin of salt and sand mix and a small loader with a full tank. We did not say the word lucky out loud. We took the sandbags inside and started filling them by hand. We worked until midnight, then covered the inner lobby windows with shields tied to brackets so that light would stay in. At 12:40 a.m., I cut the main breakers and let the building go dark. We moved through with flashlights set to the lowest setting. I brought the generator up only for 1 hour in the deep night to charge radios, phones, and emergency lights. When the engine turned, a few shapes outside drifted toward the noise and stopped against the fence. They were not in a hurry. They pressed there like people trying to listen to a conversation through a wall. Rena watched through the view slit. A shield hung low over the opening. She counted 3 up close, then several more farther off, then soft movements on the street that did not resolve into human shapes because the streetlights had gone dead. We kept our voices low. Morning was grey and flat. The neighborhood looked staged, like a set after everyone left for lunch. We ate crackers and the last of the break room fruit. Rena made a list on a legal pad of things we would need to do to make the building last a week. Water, fuel, a cleaning plan, a quarantine plan, and a routine. She wrote routine in all capitals. I suggested we pull water from the heater tanks and the rooftop storage, then set up a boil station in the garage for anything we collect later. Carla seconded the idea and asked me to find masks and gloves. We kept 2 radios on different channels and a battery handheld on the city band. We listened as distant voices popped in and out. One transmission asked any unit to respond from the west side. Another voice, clipped and steady, ordered non-essential calls to cease. Then nothing. Then a burst of loud static made Max flinch and turn away. His mother drew him closer. The day was spent building the second line. We stacked filled sandbags 2 high across the inner lobby before the hallway that led to the holding cells. We used desk frames flipped against the wall to create narrow chutes. At each chute, we placed a door that could swing shut and lock with a bar. It was not pretty, but it created friction points that could slow anything moving toward us. We hung tarps to block sightlines from outside. Every hammer strike was measured and quick. When the sound drew attention, we paused and waited while shadows collected outside like leaves against a curb. We added another clock to the wall and marked quiet hours when the generator would not run. In the late afternoon, I went up to the roof to check the vents. I set the dampers to recirculate in the main hall at minimum speed, so air would move but not draw from outside. I closed the intake that faced the alley. In the interview rooms, I turned off the fans completely and sealed the gaps with tape. I wanted air to flow only where I could see it. Carla stood at the stairwell with a clipboard and listed our filter sizes. She asked for bleach, buckets and rags. She said if we treated this like a clinic, we would stay ahead of mess, and mess was what took places like this apart. She would not say infection when she meant mess. I understood why. Words set off thoughts we did not need to entertain when our hands were busy. Rena and Mike walked the block at 6 p.m. They moved fast and stayed near cover. I watched from the roof. They checked the corner pharmacy, came back with gauze, tape, and a box of expired test kits. None of us knew if the kits would be worth anything, but the sight of factory seals made Kara exhale in a way that told me the box mattered even if the contents did not. They also found a dolly and a plastic bin of office water bottles. They did not linger in the street. One shape trailed them at a distance and then lost interest when they turned into the lot and the gate shut with a clean metal scrape. We ate in the gym that night. No one talked much. Max drew on a paper placemat with a highlighter and wrote the word precinct in block letters. He asked if the benches in the lobby were for sleeping. I said we had better places to sleep than that. He asked if the city could hear us on the radio. Rena said yes, and if the city could not respond now, someone would later. He asked when later was. She said after the next sunrise. He nodded at that because it had a clear shape. At 10:15 p.m., a sound touched the building in a way that made us look at one another before anyone stood up. It was not loud. It was careful. A knock that comprised 2 soft taps spaced evenly, then a pause, then 2 more. Not on the front doors, on the back hall fire exit. I set my hand on the radio and said I would take a look with Mike. He moved silently beside me. In the fire exit camera, the view was snowed with interference again. I had to thump the side of the monitor twice to clear the rolling lines. The camera finally caught a man swaying on his feet. Not swaying from illness, swaying from careful balance, as if he were adjusting for a heavy pack. He wore a police jacket open at the front. One sleeve was torn. He held up his hands to the camera and then tapped the glass again. 2 and 2. I recognized the face. He had been at my brother's transfer ceremony. His name was Wilson. He was soft-spoken. He had fixed the water heater once while I held the valve. I pushed the talk button. I asked him to show his wrists, his forearms, his neck, and his ankles to the camera. He did. No obvious wounds. He held up a sealed pouch, one of the same test kits Rena had found, and then a laminated card with a green stripe that read, "Negative," on a date earlier that day. I asked him to step back from the door and keep stepping until he was under the camera. He did. I asked him if anyone had followed him. He said no, speaking too loud to hear himself through the steel. I asked him where he came from. He said downtown. He said there were still people trying to move others out. He said if we were strong here, we would be valuable. Valuable was not a word that fit, but it landed hard anyway. Rena arrived and looked at me, and then at Mike. She nodded once. We ran the vestibule procedure we had drawn on the pad that morning. We opened the outer door, closed it, and waited while Carla looked him over through the inner glass. She had him turn and lift his shirt and step in place. He tried to smile. It did not sit right on his face, but it was not empty either. Carla made a decision and motioned us on. We let him in. He set down his pack and asked for water. He drank in short, quiet swallows as if the sound of drinking might draw attention. He said downtown had a task group still moving evacuees at staggered times. He said a rendezvous was scheduled for tomorrow night if the roads were workable, and if we wanted to join, we should be ready by 9 p.m. When he said should be ready, Rena's jaw tightened. She asked who was in charge of the task group. He looked at her and said a name I did not know. Mike knew it. He nodded slowly, as if the nod was less about agreement than about knowing how it would change the room. We made him a place to sit. Carla dressed a scrape on his forearm where the sleeve had torn. He insisted a fence did that. He kept his eyes on the hall while she worked. Rena told him our rules. He said the rules were good. He said he would sleep in the interview room and keep first watch. Rena said she would handle the watch. His mouth twitched in a way that could have been a smile or a flinch. It was hard to tell with the gym light buzzing. That night the generator thumped on schedule. The hum leaked through the walls into the lot. The shapes at the fence came closer again. They touched chain link with quiet palms. One tilted his head at the light in the stairwell window and did not move for a long time. I lowered the stairwell shade. I walked the interior red lines. Wilson asked where the vents drew their air. I said I had them on recirculate and minimum flow. He nodded and asked where the intake was, as if he wanted to confirm what he already knew. I pointed him toward the roof hatch door and said, "Do not open that without me." He nodded again. He sat in the interview room with the light off and the door cracked and watched the hall. Sometime around 2:30 a.m., a sharp chemical smell floated through the east wing. Carla caught it first and walked toward it with her pen light down against the floor so it would not glow under the doors. She called me to the hall. It smelled like cleaner, but we had not used cleaner yet. I followed the scent to the end room. The door was ajar. A plastic jug of bleach sat on the counter. No one had brought that jug out. I had logged every container and set them in the garage. My log was as close to neat as I could make it, and this jug was not in it. I checked the window, shut tight. I checked the vent. Someone had slid the damper open one notch. I closed it and held the handle in place for a moment. Carla said, "Keep moving." She said the more times we cross the same ground, the fewer surprises we get. By morning, Wilson was pale and quiet. He said he had not slept well. Carla checked him again with the kit. The test strip showed the same green stripe. She said we would monitor and leave it at that. Rena did not challenge her, but she added a line to the rules on the pad. No one opens vents without logging it. No one moves chemicals without logging it. I added a column for initialing and wrote my name with a thicker stroke than usual as a promise I could keep. We spent the morning moving lockers to build a wall across the south corridor. We turned 2 filing cabinets sideways and bolted them to the floor through the base plates. Mike tapped the bolts in with short, dull hits. He saved his shoulder. He had not mentioned it, but he favored one side when he lifted. I offered to trade jobs. He shook his head and kept working at the same steady pace. Rena climbed a ladder and hung a chain of small bells at chest height across the hallway, a simple noise alarm. If something brushed them in the dark, the sound would touch every room. She placed one of the riot helmets upside down by the door to hold a flashlight. She did not like carrying a light in her hand. She wanted it lower where it would leak along the floor. She said if our eyes were always above the light, anyone looking for us would look too high. In the afternoon, I ran the generator for 2 hours to pump water to a rooftop tote and heat the water tanks. We took turns washing faces and hands. Kara smiled for the first time as the warm water ran. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Small winter birds landed on the parapet and watched us as if the building were their hill now too. I pumped bleach into the tote with a marked measuring cup. Carla kept count with me and said stop when the water's scent told her enough. When the generator cut out, the station's silence closed again like a thick curtain drawn across a window. At 5:50 p.m., the radio woke again. An even voice called units to the downtown garage on a schedule that sounded practiced. Rena stood close, head tilted, taking in the timing, the call signs, the phrasing. She did not come to a conclusion too fast. She let the words settle. Mike said the voice could be real, or it could be recorded. He said good intentions recorded once could repeat for days after the building was empty. Carla said we should plan for both truths. We drew 2 exit plans, one to stay and one to go. The stay plan had no heroics in it. Close the vents, run the generator on a strict schedule, and keep the second line strong. The go plan used the motor pool bay, where the metal shutter opened into the alley. From there we could ride 2 blocks north under cover of the overpass, then cut west toward the river. We laid out keys, checked fuel, checked tires. Mike picked a car he knew had a smooth idle from his time in the fleet. He turned the key once and then off, just to feel the engine catch. Every sound had a place inside this building now, and that short catch was a promise we might still choose. Wilson kept to the edges of the room when we discussed the choice. He watched Rena and Mike, and then looked at me as if a decision would start with me because the walls were my work. I felt the weight of that and did not accept it. I said we would wait for the next sunrise before we committed. He nodded as if he had expected that. He asked if he could go to the roof to look at the skyline. I went with him. He squinted into the wind and pointed to a dark square against the base of a tower downtown. He said that was the garage. He said he could still see movement along the approach road. I could not see it. I did not say so. The wind pushed a plastic bag across the roof and it snagged on a pipe. The sudden sound made him turn too fast. He steadied himself and said he needed more water. I gave him my bottle. He wiped the rim carefully before drinking, which made me think of his training more than any impulse. That night began early. Dark settled before we were ready. We kept the generator off and ate by flashlight in the break room. Max leaned against his father and tried to follow the hands on the clock above the microwave. Rena took first watch at the front slit. I took the south hallway. Carla took the central. Mike took the garage. Wilson asked for a hallway closer to the roof stairs. Rena said no. She asked him to sit in the radio room where the map was. She asked him to write down every transmission word for word. He said he would do that. He sat there with a pen poised but did not write at first. He listened in a still way. Around midnight, the building seemed to exhale. Air moved in the vents in a way I did not like. I went to the mechanical room. The control readouts were the same, but a faint draft touched my knuckles at the edge of a panel door, a panel that had been tight. I opened it. A brush of cold air rose from the shaft. Someone had moved the bypass lever. Only one notch, but enough to pull more air from the outside intake. I slid it back. I walked the shaft line with my light and checked each damper. At the interview room, I found the door open wider than it had been left. The chair was no longer pressed to the wall. I set it back and pulled the door to the same line of scuff marks as before. On my way out, I saw Carla in the mirror's angle watching me from the hall. She lifted her chin once. She had noticed the same change. She moved past me and closed the interview room door softly. The night pulled thin in the hours before dawn. The fence outside whispered under hands too numerous to count. We heard low rustles and quiet thumps in the alley. Not rushed, present. A patient presence that made the walls feel much thinner. Rena radioed that the shadows at the front were denser than earlier. Mike countered by saying the alley was clearer than expected. He said if we wanted to roll in the next hour, the street would be at its emptiest. Rena said, hold positions and wait for light. No one argued. That was what leadership sounded like when it was not dressed in rank. At 5:30 a.m., the radio voice returned. Same name, same call, same schedule, same tone. Wilson read the words back and his voice matched the cadence too closely. Rena noticed. She set her pen down and went to the radio room door. She thanked him for the notes. She asked him to rotate with Mike. He hesitated, then stood. He wobbled, caught himself on the desk, and smiled a brief embarrassed smile. Carla stepped forward out of the shadow where she had been watching him, without looking like she was watching him. She said his color was off. She said she wanted him to sit down. He insisted he was fine. He said the fence had been higher than he remembered, and that he had not drunk enough water. He told the joke lightly, and the air in the hall lifted a notch because jokes kept people moving. Carla did not smile. She set a hand near his elbow as if to take his pulse, then stopped and said she needed a moment in the supply closet. She walked away. Rena's eyes followed her. Mike's followed Rena's. Mine followed the vents. When Carla returned, she had a sealed kit in her hand and a mask looped around one wrist. She asked Wilson to sit on the bench and hold out his arm. He looked at the mask. He looked at me as if I had a say that would save him something. I shook my head once. Not a no to the mask. A no to any further words than those already spoken. He sat. Carla ran the swab and set the strip to rest on the clipboard. We waited for the line to bloom. It did not bloom the way the earlier one had. It showed a faint second mark that did not belong. Carla kept her voice even. She suggested he go to the interview room and rest while she repeated the test to rule out contamination. He nodded. He stood up too fast. He touched the wall and blinked. He asked for his pack, and Rena said she would carry it for him. He let her. That said more than the test strip. We did not say quarantine. We moved through the plan we had written in blue pen and taped next to the vending machine at eye level. We limited air through the interview room vents and set a fan to push air under the door out into the hall where the purifier sat. We wore masks we had saved for this moment. We did not panic. We did not raise our voices. The building felt taller, and the hallways narrower. Max stayed with his mother and Daniel in the gym behind a shut door. Carla tested all of us in order. Rena first, then me, then Mike, then the family, all negative. She kept her eyes on the lines, as if sight alone could keep them from changing. At 7:05 a.m., a new sound joined the morning. A soft, repeated click from the mechanical room. The bypass lever again. I reached it and found the setting slid toward open by a notch that my hand could not have mistaken in the dark. I reset it. I laid a strip of tape across the handle and marked the edges like a seal. I printed the hour on it. I did the same at each damper. I returned to the hall in time to hear Wilson call for water again, voice thin through the interview room door. Carla spoke softly to him. She did not open the door. She kept the seal intake low. She explained what we were doing in clear steps, not to reassure him, but to keep his mind anchored in the routine. He thanked her. He sounded like a man trying to keep his words neat. Around 9 a.m., the fence outside shifted in a rolling wave. Mike watched through the motorbay slit and radioed that the lot was filling. The past 2 mornings had never looked like this. He said the alley was no longer the easy way out. Rena told him to stay inside the second line and wait. We listened to the soft ring of the hallway bells as air moved differently. The bells did not sound like danger. They sounded like a house with a window cracked. I checked the seals on the damper tape. On the third check, the tape across the east intake hung loose. Someone had peeled one corner and pressed it back. The print did not match my pen stroke. I followed the duct down the hall. It crossed over the interview room. I stood under it and felt for air where it leaked at a joint. A thread of air touched the back of my wrist. I closed the manual gate on the branch and locked it. In the radio room, the call for the downtown garage came again. It was the 3rd time that day. Always the same words. Always the same order. Rena did not ask us what we thought anymore. The answer was already in our hands. We were not leaving for the garage. At noon, Carla said she needed more masks. I went to the supply cabinet near the lockers. I found the door unlocked. We had been religious about locking it. Inside, the bleach jug sat labeled and counted, just as before. The gloves had been rearranged. The box we had finished last night was now at the back. I turned and found Wilson standing in the hall, leaning on the cinder block with his head lowered. He said he did not feel steady. He asked if he could sit in the break room for a minute just to hear other voices. Rena told him he could sit on the bench in the hall opposite the interview room. He agreed. He did not look angry. He looked relieved to be told what to do. He lowered himself to the bench inch by inch. His hand shook once as he set it down, not from fear, from muscle working against a signal that was not steady anymore. I looked at the strip of tape on the intake gate again. It stuck where I had pressed it. Carla handed me a list of things to bring from the workshop. More tape, 2 thermometers, alcohol, and the hard plastic face shields we had used 2 winters ago for a flu clinic. I found everything except 1 thermometer. On my way back, I heard a soft metallic kiss from the garage side. The motorbay door had shifted in its groove. Mike called out that something had brushed the outer shutter. Rena gathered us behind the sandbags and watched the alley slit. Figures moved across it slowly, touching the wall as if feeling for seams. One stepped directly in front of the slit and stood there, face to the steel, for a full minute. It did not push. It did not look through. It stood as if it were listening for the way we carried our weight on the other side. I felt a line of time stretch thin and hold. Rena tapped the frame twice, gently, not to make a noise outside, only to tell us to unclench and breathe steadily. At 2 p.m., Mike's voice changed. He did not raise it, but it was tighter at the edges. He said he needed a second set of hands at the garage. I backed him up. The outer shutter had caved inward by an inch where many hands had pressed it. The bolt plates moaned when the pressure pushed and let up. It was not a constant pressure. It came in breath-like cycles, if breath could be a crowd. We slid additional pins into the side channels and braced them with 2x4s angled down into the floor, like the old pictures of storefronts before a storm. Rena listened to every squeal and chose not to add more brace because the door needed flex. An unbending door breaks. A door with a little give buys time. We met eyes over the brace and understood each other without words. Carla called us to the hall. Wilson had fallen asleep on the bench, head against the cinder block, breath quiet. She tested him again through the crack in the door after we moved him back into the interview room. The strip was no longer faint. She held it in her hand a moment longer than needed, and then placed it face down on the clipboard. She wrote a small mark next to his name. She did not draw attention to it. She told us to double seal the door and switch the vent to negative pressure in that room. I went to the mechanical panel and did it. My hand did not shake. It did not need to. The handle was heavy and had weight I could feel in my shoulder. That kind of weight steadied a person. Rena stood outside the interview room and spoke to Wilson through the door. She told him the plan. She told him no one would be left alone. She told him we were going to set up a camera to monitor him without opening the door. He thanked her for keeping him inside the rules. He asked for paper. She slid it under with a pencil. He said if anything else changed, he would write it down. He sounded apologetic, not for being sick, but for bringing the outside close to us when our walls had held all day. Rena rested her hand on the frame. She did not stand there long. She did not say anything that could be heard as a promise she could not keep. By evening, the pressure on the shutter eased. The alley emptied out in a way that felt wrong. The quiet had angles in it. Mike asked if we should move the cars into position now, just in case the quiet was a path we needed. Rena said no. She said we would not ride blind into a change we did not understand. She said we would wait for the predictable, not the tempting. That word fit. Tempting was the word for many mistakes I had made when a job looked simple on the surface. Just before dark, the front view slit went grey. Not from fog, from many quiet faces moving into the street and facing the building without sound. Rena counted aloud in a whisper. She stopped counting because numbers did not help. She adjusted the shield over the slit and set a second one just above it, like eyelids, to keep light from leaking out. I cut the interior lights and moved a lamp behind a stack of desks to create an indirect glow that would not telegraph a person's height or shape. We put Max and his parents in the locker room, with the door propped by a chair that only we knew how to lift without scraping the floor. He did not argue. He had learned the pattern of our days and trusted the pattern. At 9 p.m., the radio voice repeated the downtown schedule word for word. Wilson sat on the floor on the other side of the interview room door and wrote in block letters. The camera showed his pencil moving with steady, small strokes. Carla watched the monitor and copied what he wrote into a second notebook, so we would have duplicate records if we had to pull out fast. Details somehow made the hall less narrow. When details fill a page, rooms feel larger. Rena nodded to Carla. Mike sat with his back to the sandbags. He turned the patrol car keys in his hand to keep his fingers moving. He kept the metal from clicking. It was a habit from years of waiting without making noise. I took a tool bag and went to the roof. The edge of the precinct felt near because the city was dark. A thin line of light moved along the river, a boat or a slow truck on the far bank. I checked the intake hoods and tightened the louvers with a wrench so the wind would not knock them out of place. On my way back to the hatch, I paused and listened. The street below was full, but not with motion. It was full the way a parking lot is full when a concert ends, and no one has decided to leave yet. No engines, only quiet presence. I went down the hatch and set the deadbolt. I logged the time on the board. Rena thanked me without turning her head from the slit. The next hours ran like a belt over 2 rollers, repeating but moving. We checked the seals. We walked the lines. We kept the schedule. The generator ran for a strict 60 minutes and cut out at the second. We counted 10 long breaths and then moved again. Rena rotated watches every 20 minutes to keep eyes fresh. Carla kept intake on Wilson and kept him talking in short, measured exchanges so he would not drift. He asked once about my brother without naming him. I said he was posted across town and had left before all this. He nodded and said he remembered his face from a morning briefing. He did not say more. Sometime after midnight, a smoke alarm chirped in the evidence wing. One chirp, not a full alarm. We froze and then moved. Rena pointed at the panel and then at me. I stepped to the evidence door and ran my light along the ceiling. The sensor light was green. The air did not smell of smoke. Carla suggested the battery might be loose. I pulled the cover. The battery sat crooked. I pushed it in. The chirp did not return. Rena moved her finger to the next door down. I checked that one too. Its battery was fine. We all knew what the first chirp had done to us. We did not say it out loud. We all stood taller after we fixed it, At 3 a.m., Wilson's camera showed him sleeping upright, pencil on his knee, eyes closed. His breathing looked slow and easy. Carla marked the time and adjusted the purifier fan up 1 notch. I checked the hallway bells. Not a jingle, not a swish. The calm felt thin. Rena took a slow drink of water and set the cup down with the same care she would set down a badge. She asked Mike to swap posts with her. He took the front slit. She took the garage. We kept moving. At 4:10 a.m., the interview room handle jerked once. Not a full turn, a twitch. Carla turned her head but did not step forward. The camera showed Wilson startle awake. He mumbled a word that did not land. He stood, wavered, and caught the chair back. He looked at the door like a person looks at a mirror that catches him at a bad angle. He steadied, sat again, and put the pencil in his pocket. He looked at the vent. He stood and slid the damper a hair lower with the key I had left. He saw the tape on the main gate through the glass, shook his head at himself, and sat. He had the training to check the vent. He had the human urge to breathe easier. The two sat side by side in his face. Dawn came shallow and colorless. The faces at the front glass had drifted away into the yard, as if drawn to a different sound. The alley sounded empty again, but felt heavier than before. Mike kept the garage shutter in sight. Rena lowered the second-line shields 1/2 inch to look through a seam. The street beyond the slit was clear down the block. This was the window we would have taken if the plan had been to go, and the part of me that keeps lists placed a small check mark there in my head, even as the rest of me agreed we were not rolling today. We ate quietly. Max asked if the birds were back on the roof. I told him I had seen 2 the day before, and I expected them again. He asked if birds knew how to pick safe roofs. I told him birds favored height and edges that caught wind, and places where cats did not go. He nodded like that was a proper rule he could hold in his pocket. Kara thanked us for the night. Daniel offered to take a shift in the hall so others could sleep. Rena wrote his name into the rotation, then crossed it out, then wrote it in again. She said yes. He smiled, and did not make more of it than that. We set up a rotation to clean, strip, and reset the break room. Carla set a bucket at each station and labeled them. She said if the room looked like a mess, the mess would win. We cleaned slower than usual because our hands wanted to be doing anything. Busy hands had saved my mind more than once. When I finished wiping the door frames, I walked to the mechanical room again. The seals held. The tape marks lined up. I checked the barb on the bypass lever. It held firm. Answers lived in small pieces of metal and the story those pieces told. Mine told me no one had touched this in 3 hours. At noon, a voice on the radio used a different sequence. It was a woman. Calm, directed, unfussy. She asked for any unit in the north sector with transport. Rena replied with our call sign and said we were stationary and secure with limited wheels. The woman asked her to acknowledge a list of checkpoints, and she listed 3 intersections. Rena answered yes to 2, no to 1. The woman said avoid the 3rd. She said the streets near it had a lot of stalled cars and people walking. People walking was the phrase she chose, not an error, a choice. Rena thanked her and signed off. She did not look at anyone when she set the mic down. She liked that voice. So did I. We used the calmer hours to make our place smaller. We sealed the Far East offices and moved our living area to the central hall and the gym. We put tape arrows on the floor to guide us in the dark. We built a speaking shelf on the radio room window so the next person on watch would have a place to rest an elbow while writing. Small comforts make people stick to jobs. We saved the bigger comforts, like opening a second can of fruit instead of one, for the hour after sundown, when the day's calm would leave and the night's attention would return. At 3:20 p.m., the interview room camera showed Wilson writing again. He held the pencil tighter than before. He wrote the downtown instructions in perfect block print. His hand paused only once at the name of the garage. He looked up at the camera and then went back to his paper. Carla said his fever had eased. She said his eyes were clearer. She did not say why. She did not guess. She kept to what she could see. She changed the purifier filter like it was an oil filter and taped the date to the box. That evening, we heard a small sound at the roof hatch, the kind of sound a person makes when he tests a locked door without wanting anyone to know he is testing it. I went up with Rena. We moved in a way that left no shadow across the hatch light. The lock held, the bar held, the hinge pins held. Rena put her hand near the steel and felt the temperature change under it, the way metal is slightly cooler if air is moving outside. She smiled once, short. She liked being on the side of strong hinges. We walked down and logged the check. At 8 p.m., the radio woman returned. She asked if we had children. Rena answered yes. The woman said her team had moved families first and would return later to move those with skills who could keep their group running. Rena said we could run our group. The woman said she did not doubt it. She said she would mark us and return when the grid map allowed. She used words that kept pictures small and clean. We put that voice on a shelf in our minds, where we kept tools that would be needed again. The second night pressed on the building harder than the first. The shutter did not bow, it trembled. The front faces stood closer without touching. The glass hummed at a pitch our ears did not like. The hallway bells chimed once when air shifted. The sound was not loud, and still made our eyes lift. We turned off the vending machine light and unplugged the coffee maker so nothing warm would scent the air through any crack. I taped a tarp over the break room door frame. I pressed the tape smooth with the flat of my palm. The simple motion calmed something I had not wanted to admit was riding high. At 10:51 p.m., the interview room door latch rattled in a way that was not random. It rattled with a rhythm. Carla looked at the monitor. Wilson stared at the metal, eyes narrowed. He had a length of wire in his hand. He had found it in the drawer. He bent it and slid it into the latch recess. He did not pry. He probed, as if trying to learn the shape. Carla spoke through the glass in a steady voice. She told him to put the wire on the floor. He hesitated. He set it down. He stepped back. He rubbed his hand across his face and left his palm at his mouth, as if reminding himself to keep the air behind it. He turned away from the door and sat. He pressed his palms to his knees like a student told to wait outside the principal's office. I saw the person he had been a week ago under the person he was now. I did not hate him. Hatred wastes air, and we were careful with air. At midnight, someone at the fence began to speak in a low voice. It was not words. It was the rough outline of words. The sound made the hair on my arms lift because language still breathed inside that throat. A second voice answered, echoing the first. The sound rose and fell. The rhythm did not match prayer or song or speech. It was its own shape. Rena told us to stay off the front windows. She told us to meet in the garage for a quick check. We gathered behind the barrier and listened. The voices continued for a few minutes, then stopped. The fence pressed once and then quieted again. We went back to our posts with a tighter grip on the schedule. Toward dawn, Wilson knocked once on the glass. Carla did not open. He said he had written something he wanted read aloud. She asked him to hold it to the camera. He did. The note said, in careful block letters, that if the downtown call was a recording, then someone somewhere had left it playing on a loop to keep people moving in a pattern. He drew a small map with arrows showing how groups might gather at predictable hours. He wrote that those hours might now be when the streets were most dangerous. He wrote that if his head was clear, he would tell us the pattern for another sector too. He wrote that he was sorry for moving the vent. He added that he had not touched the east intake. He asked us to trust the tape. He asked us not to open the door for him again, no matter what he said. He set the paper down. He looked at it as if it belonged to someone else now. For the first time since he arrived, Rena said thank you through the glass using his name. He nodded. He lay on the floor where Carla had positioned a mat. He pulled the blanket up to his chest and turned his face toward the wall. The camera showed his chest rise and fall. We stepped back from the door. We held the line. Morning came pale and quiet again. The day was a blur of resetting, ration counting, and checking the neighborhood through the slits. The front faces thinned at noon, regrouped at 2, thinned again at 3. We saw a truck in the distance try to climb the curb, then stop with one wheel spinning in the air without sound. No driver appeared. No one ran to it. It sat with its wheel spinning until friction took the spin away and it settled on the rim. Rena pointed at it and said that was why routine saved us. The truck had no routine. It had momentum and nothing else. Momentum drains to nothing. Routines refill. I did not say that thought aloud. She had already said it in fewer words. We kept Wilson fed through the door and took turns speaking to him. We asked about his last route. He described intersections, not people. He described doors, not faces. He described times, not names. He saved details with sharp edges because soft details hurt to touch. He wrote down a list of things he wanted kept if we had to leave. He did not ask for anyone to carry them. He wrote the list to make sure nothing needed from his pocket took a pocket away from someone else. I taped the list inside the evidence cabinet where my backup keys hung. That evening, clouds rolled in from the lake. Rain hit the roof and was a relief because it masked other sounds. The fence quieted under the steady tapping. We collected buckets under downspouts behind the locked Sallyport door. Carla held a pan under a seam in the gym roof and laughed a short, clean laugh when the drip hit the pan exactly on beat for 20 hits in a row. She said sometimes the world still lined up without help. She set the pan back down carefully, as if thanking the drip without making a show of it. At 9:15 p.m., the radio woman returned. She said her team had to divert. She said we should not wait for her within 24 hours. She said to hold where we were if possible and to avoid any large public buildings where voices echoed. She did not explain the last instruction. She did not need to. We had already heard the echoing voices at the fence the night before. Rena acknowledged and kept her voice even. She signed off and leaned against the map table for 1 second. No longer. Mike took that second for her and slid into a watch position until she stood back upward. Teamwork did not need applause. It needed rest seconds counted in quiet. Night 3 was the worst until it was not. The alley filled, then emptied, then filled again. The front faces returned. The fence gripped and released as if wind blew with a human pulse. We did not sleep. We took 4-minute sits with our eyes closed and our feet planted. Wilson did not knock. He did not move much. His pencil lay on the floor where it had fallen. Carla watched the camera and took notes on his breathing rate without writing the word breath. She used hash marks and times. She used the margins of the page and made a grid that kept her hands busy and her mind clear. Sometime near morning, a hard knock shook the back hall exit. 4 sharp raps, then silence. Not the 2 and 2 from the night he arrived. New knuckles, new rhythm. Rena signaled us into position. Mike stood to the side of the door with a baton ready, not to swing, to wedge under a handle if it turned. I kept my light off. Carla stood behind the desk and kept the radio in sight. The knock came again. A muffled voice called a name none of us knew. The voice was too calm for what waited outside. That calm had the wrong shape. Rena did not answer. The voice went away. 10 minutes later, the fence whispered again. We waited for an hour before we moved. We began to accept the building as our boundary line. The idea of leaving it had less weight each hour. It was not fear, it was math. We had water for 5 days if we were careful, fuel for 4 hours a day for 7 days if we kept the load low, and the air handlers at minimum. Food was thin, but precise. We could stretch it. We could trade small comforts for days if the trade was clean. We crossed out the go plan on the whiteboard with 1 line, not an X, because we might need it later. A single line can be lifted back off in the mind. An X is final. Wilson slept more and wrote less. Carla spoke less and watched more. She asked him to write down any change. He wrote that the sound in his ears had a low hum now. He wrote that the light in the room felt false and asked for it to be dimmed. We dimmed it. He wrote that the faces outside the front glass were not moving. He asked if they were statues. Rena answered that they were not. He wrote that he knew. He asked her to ignore his questions until morning because his questions were not useful. She said she would answer anyway because the sound of answers kept the hall orderly. He wrote thank you and set the pencil down for the last time. On the 4th morning, the city shifted. Sirens returned in a far quadrant. A transformer blew near the hospital with a crack and a brief green glow. A flock of birds lifted from a parking structure and turned in a tight wheel, as if deciding whether to stay in the city. They settled back down. The fence quieted. The silence felt like the space before a decision. Rena gathered us at the map. She looked at the garage route and then at the roof route. She finally looked at the evidence door. She tapped the map once at a side street we had not considered. She said if we left, we would leave at noon under rain, not at night under eyes. She said we would only leave if we had 2 cars and a plan to return for the second group if we had to split. She said we would likely not leave. She said she wanted us to rehearse the exit for muscle memory anyway. We did. We rolled the car forward. We timed the shutter. We timed the door. We counted steps. We did not open to the alley. We closed it all again and set the pins. At 11:30 a.m., the interview room camera went grey for a second and then returned. The light flickered and steadied. Wilson lay still, his face turned toward the wall. Carla watched and wrote the time. She did not look away. Rena placed a hand on her shoulder. Carla nodded once. We breathed together and stayed at our posts. The building was a series of rooms and rules. The rules held. The rooms held because the rules did. The afternoon dragged but did not break. We cleaned, checked, reset. We rotated rests. We gave Max a deck of cards and watched him build a house on the gym mat. He tore it down when it leaned to one side and started again. Daniel read the old community bulletin board out loud to him, pointing at the flyer for a pet adoption event that would not happen now, but still meant what it meant. Kara wrote a list of words Max could spell from the bulletin board, and he spelled them. It was a small school day. The small school day steadied us in ways that sandbags could not. When the rain returned at dusk, we worked faster than before to finish our cycles so the sound would cover our movements. The fence was empty now. The faces had gone. We did not read that as a gift. Gifts that arrive from nowhere often cost too much. Rena shortened watches to 10 minutes. Mike checked the garage hinge plates and lubricated them with a full turn and a half. No more. He did not want to change the door's voice so much that it sounded new to the alley. I liked the way he thought. The door kept its same low scrape. The scrape was part of the station now, and any new sound would be suspicious. At 9:40 p.m., the radio woman called again, but her voice was sharp with wind. She asked for a repeat. She said something about the river, but static took the rest. Rena repeated our location and status. The woman said we were on the list. She said if we could hold 2 more days, she would move us. She said if we could not, we should mark the roof. Rena asked with what. The woman said anything bright. Rena looked at me. I said cones and training vests would do. She nodded. She told the woman we would mark the roof if needed. She did not commit to a signal until we were sure. At 11 p.m., the station shivered. Not wind, a press from all sides at once. The hallway bells sang once and then steadied. The front slit showed empty street. The alley slit showed darkness layered in thicker strips than before. The garage shutter creaked and then was still. The building listened to itself. We knew that feeling. We had felt it a dozen times during storms, when pressure changed and doors wanted to move in their frames. The building was a chest inhaling. We stood still and let it. 20 minutes later, light footsteps moved on the roof. Soft and quick, like a person in socks. Rena signaled me. We climbed the stairs with the lights off. The hatch bar held. We listened. The steps moved away. Then came the faint slide of something dragged across gravel. A hand tested the hatch again. A whisper spoke in a voice that was not ours. It said a name that none of us bore. Then silence. We returned to the hall. Carla wrote the time and the word roof in her notebook. She did not add a comment. The word was enough. At 1 a.m., Wilson called out. Not loud. A clear word to show he was awake. He asked if morning had come. Carla answered that it had not. He said he thought the light had changed. She explained the dimmer. He apologized for asking. She said no apology was needed. He asked if the downtown call was still running. She said yes. He said the loop had 3 versions and we had heard 2. He said the third would come at 3 a.m. Rena wrote that down. At 3 a.m., the third version came. It had a different sign-off and a different truck number. We looked at one another. He had been right. That small fact anchored the entire haul. Dawn brought a decision. Rena set the keys to 2 cars on the table and set the map next to them. She looked at Daniel and Kara. She said if we left, they would go in the first car with Carla and Max, and I would drive the second car with Mike and Rena. She said if the road split us, the first car would follow the river north, and the second would take the overpass to intercept later. She said if only one car could go, it would be the one with the child. She said if none could go, she would stay at the front slit and call in our status every 2 hours, so anyone listening could draw a map with our position. She said Wilson would stay in the interview room with the purifier running at full, and the door sealed with tape we could cut in seconds if needed. She did not ask for debate. We did not offer any. The plan was clean. Clean plans leave no room for argument. At 10 a.m., we heard a truck down the block and the steady scrape of a snowplow, even though it was not winter. The sound was right because city crews had been repurposing plow trucks with barricade pushers. The truck turned the corner, and a voice on a bullhorn asked anyone inside the station to come to the door with hands visible. Rena stepped to the slit and looked. The truck was painted city yellow, but the logo on the door did not match the city's current seal. It was an old stencil. She looked at the men on the truck. They wore mismatched helmets, and one wore a shirt with a college team from another state. She asked them to identify the supervisor on the truck. The bullhorn voice gave a name that did not fit our city. Rena thanked him and said we had our own plan. He paused, and then his voice hardened. He said if we did not come out now, we would lose our window. Rena said we had survived 3 nights and would survive more. The man told the driver to move on. The truck left slowly. Later, a different truck with a correct seal passed. No bullhorn, no pause. It did not even slow. That told us enough. The 5th day passed in a straight line. We did our jobs. We added nothing new. We removed nothing we would miss. We set a long rope in the stairwell to guide us in the dark if smoke filled the hall. We taped every flashlight lens in a narrow slit to keep the beams tight and low. We ate steady. We slept in turns. We spoke only to move information. We held our words until they were needed, and then we used them all at once and went quiet again. At dusk, the voices at the fence returned. This time they did not echo words. They hummed a flat line. The hum grew louder and then fell to silence. The shutter held. The glass held. The bells did not ring. The roof steps did not return. Rena's face was set in the way a person's face sets when he holds a door for a stranger on an elevator, and that kindness becomes the best thing he does all day. She watched the slit and kept her arms loose. Mike cracked his knuckles without noise. I wound the rope in a loose coil and set it by the garage door where my hand could find it without looking. We were ready for either choice, hold or move. At 8:20 p.m., the radio woman cut through the static. She was closer. She said her team had cleared a school north of us and would begin pulling families from this sector at dawn. She asked if we could mark the roof for air if the street was blocked. Rena said yes. I ran upstairs and pulled 2 orange cones and 3 vests and wired them to the parapet in a triangle. I set a flashlight under each vest, making them glow like small tents. From above, the triangle would stand out against the grey roof. I strapped the lights to the pipe so the wind would not flip them. I looked over the city and saw 1 other triangle glowing far off. That told me someone else had heard the same call and had lived to answer it. I climbed down and told Rena what I had seen in the plainest words. She nodded and let out a breath she had held since noon. We slept in half-hour turns. Every alarm felt like a full day passing. At 4:50 a.m., the motor bay door shifted again and then steadied. The alley looked clear and then, in a blink, filled with slow-moving figures that pressed as if drawn by a magnet. Not fast, not frantic, steady and unswerving. The pattern made my mouth go dry. I handed Rena the keys. She put them back on the table. She said we would hold until the helicopter. She said we would not run the alley. She said no sudden moves. She said trust the roof. At daylight, the helicopter came low over the river and then rose above the hospital. It was not military. It wore a medical stripe. The rotors washed sheets of rain against the parapet. It circled once and then hovered above our triangle. A voice in our radio said, "Hold position." We held. Rena stepped into the stairwell with the radio pressed close and answered. The helicopter dropped a rope ladder and set a line on the roof. The fence surged. The alley filled completely. Mike stood by the garage door and watched without moving. He would not open that door now for anything. His stillness was its own wall. We moved fast and clean. Carla took Max and Kara up the stairs. Daniel followed with the pack of first aid supplies. Rena stood at the stairwell threshold until the last foot cleared each step so she could count. I ran to the interview room and knelt by the door. I spoke Wilson's name and told him we had air. He did not answer. Carla returned from the stairs and stood beside me. She said we could not open the door. I knew that. I put my palm flat on the steel and told him we would leave the purifier on, the door sealed, the water bottles full, and the light dim. I said, if I could come back, I would come back. I said, if anyone came with the key, I would know because he had made the map and his handwriting was in it, and I would follow that map if the city allowed it. I said what I could say. I stood. I left the hall. On the roof, the rotor wash pushed air into our faces. The crew chief shouted a name. Rena shouted back our count. He looked at Max, at Kara, at Daniel, at Carla, then at me, then at Mike, then at Rena. He pointed to the ladder and nodded. We made a circle, hands on shoulders, hands on the rope, so no one would step alone. We moved one by one. When it was my turn, I gripped the sides and climbed. The rungs were slick from rain and wrapped tape. Halfway up, I looked down. Rena stood below with Mike. She raised 2 fingers and then 1, counting. I finished the climb. The crew pulled me in. I turned and leaned out and reached as Mike came up. He handed me a bag and then climbed. Rena was last. She hooked her foot in the lowest rung and looked back over the parapet as if counting tools in a kit she did not want to leave behind. She climbed. The crew chief slapped the fuselage. The pilot lifted. The rope swung and then cleared the parapet. The triangle on the roof glowed under us for 1 more second and then dimmed as the lights turned to dots in the rain. From the helicopter window, the precinct looked like a square box with a red thread of brick running along the cornice. The front glass faced the street like a sober eye. The alley returned to its own business as the rotor wash pushed the crowd back in a low tide. The building stayed in its grid square and did not move. A lot of places look different from above. A police station looks like a police station from any angle. It was built to. The pilot banked and followed the river. The crew chief handed Rena a headset. The radio woman's voice came through the cabin speakers. She said we had done well. She said the next precinct to the north had a broken stair, and anyone leaving had fallen on it because a man had tried to carry too much at once. She said we had made the right choice to take nothing we did not need. Rena said we left one in quarantine. The woman said she was sorry and that she understood. She said she would mark the file in case the building was cleared later. The helicopter flew over the garage Wilson had drawn, and I saw the shape of a convoy parked there in a neat line. Not moving. Doors open. No men on the ground. The kind of tableau that would sit untouched for days. The pilot did not circle. He flew on. The crew chief closed the cabin door tighter against the rain. Max fell asleep against his mother. Daniel's mouth moved as if counting silently. Mike's hands hung loose. Carla closed her eyes and rested her head on the wall of the cabin. Rena stared ahead at the horizon where the river turned east. The headset cord hung across her shoulder like a thin vine. She sat without bowing. When we landed, the school building smelled like soap and cardboard. Volunteers took us to a corner of the gym behind a curtain and handed us blankets and small plastic bowls of soup. Rena spoke to a coordinator and filled out a form with our names. She signed it with the care of someone signing for a package that mattered. She asked me to find a room with a radio. I found a folding table with a transceiver set on it and 2 batteries clipped to the side. I tuned to the city band. I spoke our location and condition for anyone listening. I said we had left the station sealed and noted the time. I gave the fuel count and the water count. I said the fences were intact and the doors were barred. I said there was 1 person inside the interview room with supplies. I did not elaborate. I did not argue with the air. I logged the transmission in a notebook someone had already positioned there with a pen tied to it on a string. An hour later, a female voice answered. Not the woman from before, a new one. She said she was logging all precinct reports. She asked me to repeat the address. I did. She asked about the condition of the mechanical systems. I told her the vents were set to minimum and listed the dampers sealed with tape at the east intake. She thanked me. She asked if I wanted to leave a message for anyone who might return. I said yes. I said if someone entered later, my name was on the maintenance log for the 3rd floor under the red vice, and if he found that log, he should flip to the last page, and the last page would have a note about a ladder in the north stairwell that sticks on the 3rd rung. I said if he knew that rung, I would know who he was. It was a small code. It was a way to confirm without saying names. She said she would add it. I thanked her. We slept that afternoon because the gym was quiet in a way that felt polite. The curtain held our small corner like a palm. I woke to a laminated sign taped to the post that read, "Check in with radio at 6 p.m. I went early. The radio room had a map with pins. I found our precinct pin and pressed it more firmly into the board. A man in a different colored vest sat at the table and marked forms without lifting his head. I did not talk to him. I sat and listened and wrote down calls in the blank spaces on the form. At 6:05 p.m., I keyed the mic and used the same words Rena had used for 3 days. Precinct 12, holding. I said it out of habit. I paused. I corrected to say evacuated. I said the building still stood. I said the doors were strong and the lines of tape were straight and the bells were hung. I said the rope was coiled by the garage door. I said someone should check those things if he had the time, so the next group would inherit rules that matched the walls. I said I would be ready to return if asked. The man at the table looked up and smiled at that, in a way that had no judgment in it. He had heard similar sentences, I guessed. He had written some himself. Mike came in and stood beside me. He said we could ask for something besides repairs next time. He shook his head and said he did not know why he had said that. I said we ask for what we know how to do. He said that was true. He said he was glad to have ridden with Rena and Carla and me. He said he was not good with words. I said he had good tools and that had carried us. He nodded and left. That felt like a goodbye without ending anything. Rena found me at the radio and set a paper cup next to my elbow. It held half coffee and half hot water. She said we would stay the night and then decide whether to help with building checks along the river. She said the city needed hands that could count and tape and lift. She said no one had written my brother's name on any board here yet, and I should not wait for a board to tell me what to do. She said if I wanted to put a note on the city net for him, I should do it now while I had words that were not worn out from repeating. I nodded. I keyed the mic and spoke carefully. I kept family words out of it and used the clean language of work. I said I was at the North School and I would stay by the radio from 6 to 8 each night. I said if he heard me, he should answer with our childhood address and the color of the door so I would know it was him. I signed off and folded the paper with that information into my pocket. I knew it would be smoother by morning from being touched. As the gym quieted and the light took on that late shape where things look edged without being sharp, I sat with Carla on the bleacher. She asked me what part of the station I would fix first if I could go back inside for an hour. I said the east intake gates worn bushing. She nodded and said she would retape the interview room seal and move the purifier 1 foot to the left where the current did not make the curtain flutter. Rena said she would replace the hallway bell line with a thin copper wire because bells fatigue when they sing too much. Mike said he would put a wedge under the motor bay door so the bottom edge did not settle. Daniel said he would tighten the screws on the locker room bench so it did not wobble. Kara said she would write out the routine schedule in large letters and tape it chest high on the wall where a person who is scared can still see it. Max said he would redraw the station on a new page and keep the word precinct straight this time. None of us laughed. We all liked the sound of those plans because each one began and ended with hands on a job. When it was full dark outside and the rain had finally moved off, I returned to the radio for the last check-in. The room was empty. The map with the pins looked like a quiet constellation. I keyed the mic one more time and said the words that had become my habit and my line. I said Precinct 12, still holding, evacuated as of 0900 hours, second line intact, front glass intact, garage shutter intact, rope coiled, interview room sealed, 1 occupant inside with purifier running and water on hand. I said supplies logged on the board. I said locks on the roof hatch and garage pins set deep. I said if anyone entered, he should call my name, and I would find my way back if the river allowed it. I said we had kept the station like a promise, and I hoped the next hands would feel that in the walls. I said we were out, and the place was ready for the next person who needed it. I signed off and set the mic down. I walked back to our cots. Rena slept with her hand on the radio clipped to her vest. Carla slept with her notebook under her elbow. Mike lay with his boots crossed at the ankle, still and easy. Daniel and Kara lay close to Max, who had his paper drawing folded under his pillow like a small plan. I lay down and looked at the dark ceiling, and did not think past the next hour. The rain had washed the city. The night had not changed shape. The building we had left stood in its square, holding all the things we had set in place and the quiet rules we had written with tape and rope and time. I closed my eyes and pictured the red line on the floor next to every door. I saw people following those lines with careful steps and staying behind them when the dark pressed. I did not need to hear it to know it was true. We had left the station strong. Anyone listening on the city net could draw their own maps now. I wanted them to draw that one well. If anyone asks tomorrow how we made it through, I will point him to a coil of rope, a strip of tape across an intake lever, a jar of screws that no one dropped, a row of sandbags that no one kicked out of line, a rule on a page that someone wrote clean enough that even a scared hand could read it. The rest is noise. The rest is doors that open only when needed. The rest is the steady saying of simple sentences into a radio until a voice answers. For now, I will say one more simple sentence before I sleep, even if it is only to the darkness above me. Precinct 12 held. The doors held. We kept our promise to the building and to one another. That is the whole account. That is enough. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe to keep the stories alive. For now, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and stay alive. Jack's Nightmares, signing off. Until next time, survivor.